welcome back to Room 237, and this is a really random review. This is one I hadn't really planned on seeing or reviewing. Excuse me, this is one I haven't really talked about. And yes, I do know that the Q&A, it's time to do the Q&A, but I've had a lot of stuff going on in my personal life, so when I do have time to do a video, I just want to do like a review to get the movie out of my head. But this is for a very, very good movie that I really want to talk about. And this is one that I've heard of, or at least I've heard the title. And when I found out it was an A24 film, I thought, well, now I gotta see it, because when it comes to modern horror, A24 has got to be my favorite company. And I know A24 is hit or miss. People love them or they hate them. People that hate it think they're too slow, or they're too much like drama, or they come off as trying to be too deep and pretentious. But all my favorite horror films from 2010s to present has been A24. And this is one from 2017, and it is The Killing of a Sacred Deer. Which, one, that's a pretty cool title. And I love this cover. It looks just like a Kubrick cover, and the influence of Kubrick is laced throughout this entire film in a very good way. Now, it's directed by, probably going to butcher this name, Yorgos Lanthimos, excuse me. Now, he's done a number of films. I think most notably, other than this, was a recent film called The Lobster, which also stars Colin Farrell. And this is based on the Greek tragedy Iphigenia at Aulis, if I pronounced that correctly, by Euripides. And it was written by Lanthimos and Efthimis Philippou. Wow. And stars Colin Farrell, Nicole Kidman, Barry Keoghan, Raffi Cassidy, Sonny Suljic, Alicia Silverstone in a cameo, and Bill Camp. And the cinematography was done by Ptimios Bakatakis. Yeah, I can't pronounce half these names. It's mostly a Greek film. It's in English, but I think it was a co-production with Greece because the director is Greek. Now, this is a movie that reminded me a lot of Parasite. And movies like Parasite, I really like to go in as blind as possible. I didn't really look up a synopsis of this. I didn't watch a trailer of this. And I think that's the best way to go into a movie like this. And I really enjoyed it. It did remind me of Parasite because where I did go in it totally blind, kind of somewhat knowing the premise, it did feel like around the halfway mark, it totally turns into a different film. But it is very performance driven. It is very cinematography and atmosphere driven. And I love the Kubrick. I mean, with these slow, zooms or pullouts, or these very voyeuristic dolly shots as they follow people like around the corner, down a hallway, very symmetrical shots with its set design. Love the look of the film, and it's shot gorgeously. And I do know that, and I think this turned off some people. Sorry if it sounds like I'm not breathing very well. I've been having some asthma issues lately, and I'm on a new prescription for it, so. This is the first video I've done since that, so I'm probably not used to doing that. I do know that the director does have a lot of satire in his films. This is the only one of his I've seen. But it is easy to see the satire, and he has a very, very, very dry approach to that. And here I think the satire is sort of kind of what people think about open heart surgeons, because that's what Colin Farrell plays. Sort of how they're these very overly confident, almost, godlike people. And sort of what happens to Colin Farrell's character throughout the course of this film, where he just loses all control of the outcome of his life. I would say this is probably my favorite Colin Farrell performance, but the real kicker performance with this would be with the kid Martin, who I believe was played by Barry Keoghan, yes, who was only, well, he was actually 25 at the time, but he plays a 16-year-old and very well. But everyone has sort of a weird way of talking. Like, I guess the director wanted everyone to kind of talk like a robot, because they are super dry. I mean, even the first conversation of the film, which, one, the opening shot is incredible. I mean, it's this close-up of this, open heart surgery with the heart just beating. I don't know if that's real or not. If it's not, it's a damn good effect. And the camera just does this slow pull out with this classical, I want to say it's German opera. It really helps set the tone for this movie. And then when Steven, Colin Farrell, is done, he's walking with one of his colleagues down, this Kubrick hallway shot. They're talking about each other's watches, like how many depths it's good for, and leather versus metal straps. And it's very, like, quick responses, but they kind of have like this robotic way of talking. And that's kind of what the whole movie's like. But then you get, I forgot his name. Martin, played by Keoghan, excuse me. Barry Keoghan, and he steals this movie. Which, I'm not really sure how much of this film I should reveal early on. It's kind of a weird movie to tell. There's a lot to really look into as far as his themes and everything. But he's definitely the takeaway performance. He's really good at playing this sweet, innocent kid. But even right from the beginning, there's something kind of off about him. And it gets to the point where it's just full on just playing a mentally disturbed type, just psycho kid in a very subdued way. I mean, there's a couple scenes where it kind of elevates, but he's pretty subdued throughout the whole film. And he never loses touch of being this kid. Like, he's not like Better Watch Out, where he's this super smart, like, sociopathic kid. I mean, he still sounds like a young kid who just has this diabolical plan. Which they never go into his plan, which I appreciate. They just talk about what's going to happen, not how he pulled it off or what exactly it is. I like how they did that as well. But anyway, where the movie starts out and then where it ends up, this is why I went into it blind, was because I love it when a movie takes you for a ride like that, like Parasite, where it just hard cuts and you get a totally different movie. Because at first, after Colin Farrell and his friend talk about, watches, he goes to this diner where he meets Martin. And they seem to be friends. Colin Farrell gives him this watch as a gift. The kid asks if he can hug him. Now, what I thought was going on was, is he having an affair with a young kid, or is he grooming this kid? I didn't really know where it was going. And then, like, one of the first interactions we see with his family, which I think helps establish that satire, excuse me, of, like, these godlike men, like, open heart surgeons that really have your life in their hands. His teenage daughter is in choir. He likes to make sure her voice is perfect, telling his son to make sure he did all his chores and gets a haircut. And then him and Nicole Kidman, one of the way they have sex is one of his kinks is he likes her to pretend that she's under anesthesia and she just lays there. So I think that's part of the satire with that. And this kid just keeps coming up in his life. Like, shows up at his work, gets invited to Colin Farrell's home for dinner, and he starts to befriend the two kids. Then he invites Colin Farrell over to his house, even when he doesn't want to go. He just kind of makes the plans and makes it so he has to go. Then his mother, played by Alicia Silverstone, who I didn't recognize at first, tries hitting on him, and he tries to, make it sound like, hey, you'd be a great couple. We do know that Martin's dad died somewhat recently, and we find out certain bits about his father's death and how Colin Farrell is linked to that, but that's sort of sprinkled throughout the film. Which actually, first we're told that Martin's dad died in a car accident a decade prior, but he was a patient of Steven's. And actually, when Martin goes to have dinner with Steven's family, we see that the daughter Kim is very, is attracted to him and starts developing feelings for him. But then after Steven goes to Martin's house, the attention that Martin seeks starts becoming more and more desperate, more and more frequent, to the point where Steven just has to kind of ignore him. He's showing up at his work, he's showing up everywhere. And there's some odd conversations, like, this might be part of the satire or the director's sort of, really dry sense of humor. Because, like, when Martin first goes to Steven's house, he's with the two kids, says he's 16, and the young son Bob asks if he has hair under his arms, and he asks to see, and he says, oh, my dad's hairier than that. But then, like, later Martin goes for a checkup, and so he's got his EKGs and everything hooked up, and he starts talking about body hair, and he asks to see Steven's. And then finally, or at least as far as I'm going to get before spoilers, Bob is having a hard time getting up for school. And this is when he tells Steven, like, my legs are numb. I can't move my legs. So they take him into the hospital for all these tests, but when he's at the hospital, he seems fine. All these tests show him to be fine. He goes to walk out of the hospital, and his legs collapse again. And then shortly after, same thing happens to Kim. And this is when Martin reveals to Steven, because he asks him for just a few minutes, and he does kind of, the way the actor acts like a young kid. I don't know if he's supposed to have any, I'm not quite sure how to say it, with him, but he does act like a young child. Like, just his mannerisms and the way he kind of rambles and talks. But he pretty much says, in order to equal the balance in the universe that's been done, because now we find out, or at some point we find out, that Martin's dad didn't die in a car accident. He died on the operating table with Steven as the doctor. So Steven took a member of his family. So this is when Martin tells him, Bob, the son, Kim, the daughter, and Anna, Nicole Kidman, all three of them will die after 3 stages, which is paralysis, self-imposed starvation, bleeding from the eyes, then death. Unless he chooses one of them, kills them, and then the other 2 will be cured. That will equal the balance. Now, we never find out throughout the course of the rest of the film if this is some sort of hex, if this is just a power that Martin has, what he did to cause this, how he's controlling this. And I do appreciate that, because if this was any other movie, Blumhouse or whatever, we would spend a whole act on trying to figure out how Martin's able to do this. And I think it would take away from the tension that this movie's building. It would really be a huge detriment, I think. Not everything needs to be spoon-fed to us. I know a lot of people like that. I know a lot of people say, well, we should get a sequel that shows, how this was done. I'm like, a little ambiguity is nice. And I think it helps go along with the believability, because Martin could have said anything. Hex, I have this power, I had someone else, put a hex on you, whatever. And honestly, I think it would sound kind of stupid. Just by saying this is what's happening and having it happen, it really cuts out it sounding silly or sort of losing the believability, and you're able to go with it a lot easier. And Steven doesn't believe it at first until he sees Bob refusing to eat, and then the same thing starts happening to Anna. Now that's as far as I'm going to go for spoilers, or until spoilers, but I really enjoyed this movie. I mean, I'm a huge sucker for A24 anyway. And yeah, this is definitely more of the slow burn, more of like a psychological horror film. And it does take quite a while before we get to that point of, when something goes wrong. It also has a very Shining-esque score, where it's just tones or sounds instead of actual music, except for the German opera pieces that's at the very beginning and the very end. Whether it be these high note screech sounds that just kind of, each piece of the score just layers it perfectly. It doesn't get too bombastic. There's a couple parts with this really blah blah, but I think it fits perfectly. And if you haven't seen this, I highly recommend it. It might not be for everybody. Again, there are some very strange moments. I'll talk about when I get into spoilers, but there is a conversation when Steven tries to get Bob to admit that this is all a joke, to not go to school or whatever. And the way he goes about trying to get him to admit that he's, just fooling around. It's a bit strange, but it's wonderfully acted, beautifully shot. I mean, it definitely feels like a modern Kubrick film. And I've said that before. I've said how The Witch really reminded me of The Shining, or The Lighthouse really reminded me of The Shining. A lot of times it's tone, atmosphere, and tension or dread. With this, though, a lot of it is in the cinematography, and just those perfectly symmetrical hallway shots, or the way it uses its symmetrical set, those voyeuristic dolly shots, the way we either follow someone or have them walk towards the camera in those hallways. Really great big, wide shots that, especially in some of the hospital spaces where, even the poster that you'll see in the thumbnail, it kind of reminded me of the monolith scene at the end of 2001. And the best way to go into this, even though I just described the first half of the movie, is to go in as blind as possible. I think that's the best way to go into most movies, but especially ones like A24 or IFC, another company I really like. Movies like this or Parasite, definitely worth going in as blind as possible. And I I'll go as far as say I loved this movie. I thought it was great. It's very depressing. It really is. And you really just kind of watch this guy that I don't think we're supposed to think too highly of in the first place. But at the same time, it is kind of sad watching him totally lose control of his life, because of a mistake, and how well this actor just plays this disturbed 16-year-old. I mean, he steals the movie. So I highly do recommend it, but it's a fairly new film, and I don't want to spoil it for anyone, so I'm going to get into spoilers now. So really, after Kim really starts showing the same symptoms as Bob, which actually there is one point, because she's been going out with Martin on his bike, and she's been sneaking out, going out with him, having him over while everyone else is out. She does undress and give herself to him, but he gets up and leaves. So yeah, when she starts showing symptoms, and the hospital says there's nothing that there's nothing that we can find, Anna decides to have them in their hospital beds taken home. They'll be put on a feeding tube, and this is where the desperation really starts coming in on both Stephen and Anna. They both go about it different ways. Stephen goes about it more like the movie Prisoners. It doesn't show him kidnapping Martin, but we do eventually just see him down in the basement. Martin's duct taped up and Stephen's just beating the hell out of him, which this is probably the best scene with Martin, where he's just in his childish way mocking Stephen and showing him how, look, this is all I knew what to do. Because there was a scene earlier when Anna goes to plead with Martin, because when Anna first figures it out, Kim is on her cell phone and she's able to walk to the hospital window to wave to Martin, and Anna knows that's who she's talking to. But when the phone gets hung up, that's where her legs give out again. So she knows that Martin is able to control this situation from however. She goes over to his house to kind of plead with him, and there is this great monologue he goes on about, because he's got this plate of spaghetti, and as he's eating it, he's telling the story about how he was always told he eats spaghetti the same way as his dad. He thought that was special, but then he sees everyone eat spaghetti the same way, so it's really not that special. So kind of like, could you imagine, losing something that special? That's kind of the vague hint / threat that he gives her. That's all he gives her, except for, I think he was the one that tells her that Stephen was his father's doctor. I could be wrong, but I think that's how she finds out. But she starts to suspect that this is a revenge plot because Stephen is a former, or once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic, but that he's in recovery, and maybe he was drinking the day of Martin's father's operation. And even Stephen says no matter what happens on the operating table, it's never the surgeon's fault. If anything, it's always the anesthesiologist's fault. So she even goes to his anesthesiologist, which he can't give her the file, but in exchange for a hand job in his car, he'll tell her some things about that day, which is Stephen had some drinks and he frigged up the operation. The guy died. And actually, before they go home, what I meant to say, the conversation when Stephen tries to get Bob to admit that it was a joke, he says he wants to play a game where they each tell a secret and the bigger secret wins. And Steven tells him the story about how when he was his age, he had just started to masturbate, but he never really ejaculated much. And he got curious, so when his dad fell asleep, he jerked his dad off, and he had this huge ejaculation and kind of freaked him out, and he ran away. He said he's never told anyone that before. Now you gotta tell me a secret. Which I could imagine being a young child and having this incredible thing, this incredibly bad thing happening to you, and then being told that, all because your dad thinks you're lying. And then he threatens to shave his head and feed him his own hair, and he just says it's not a joke. But yeah, speed back up. So now Martin is essentially a prisoner in their household. And, you know, Steven gets his rifle and threatens to shoot him. Just the way he mocks him. Like, oh yeah, good job explaining that one. 4 people dead, 1 bullet. You know, yeah, good luck explaining that. Because he said, oh, are you going to shoot me? You know, and then what? He said, I'm going to dig a hole in the backyard, I'm going to bury you in it, and you're going to rot. So, oh, good job explaining that. 4 people, 1 bullet. How are you going to explain that? So if you're going to dig a hole in the backyard, it better be a big one. And just, the way he does it is, you know, the actor's amazing in this. But also just the way he shows him, because he said the best, I mean, he's getting the shit beat out of him by Steve. He's got blood coming out of his mouth. And he doesn't, you know, succumb to any of it. He's still talking to him. He says, the best thing I can give you is an example of what I mean. So he bites Steven's arm really hard. And he's like, now, would you forgive me for that? He's like, you could, I don't remember what he said, like, you could forgive me, but why would you? The only thing that would make it even is this. And then he bites his own arm. We see blood coming out, and he even spits out like a chunk of his arm. And he's like, there's balance, there's justice. Pretty much saying, you've done this to me, now I have to do this to you. And there's even a scene where Kim crawls all the way down to the basement to give Martin a cigarette. She tries to get him to undo what's been done to her so they can run off together, but he just sits there. She starts throwing shit at him. And then more desperation. I mean, Kim and Bob start arguing over, you know, who's going to be chosen to live. She starts professing her love to her parents. Bob starts acting like he wants to do his chores again, promising to get a haircut, even though he can't walk. Anna says the best thing to do is to do one of the kids because they can have another one. Steven even goes to their principal to ask who the best of the 2 kids are. The principal can't give him an answer. And I guess it's also playing on the satire of how Steven has this idea of what the perfect family is. So he's trying to make the best decision, but not doing it with his heart, just trying to be like, well, what's my best option? And finally, what it comes down to is, and I don't remember Anna ever succumbing to any of the stages. We do see Bob bleeding from the eyes at one point. He reaches stage 3. But I don't ever remember Anna losing power of her limbs. So what Steven does is he duct tapes them all up in the living room, puts a pillowcase over their head, he puts a hat over his face, he has his rifle, and he just spins around. Wherever he fires, whoever it hits, it hits. This is a good tension building scene because, I mean, it's dead silent. You can hear like the patter of his feet as he spins. You can hear everyone breathing and sobbing. This is a very tense scene, and the first 2 shots miss. It's not till the 3rd shot does he actually connect, and it's with Bob. And so then it ends with, you know, we have that German opera from the very beginning as Steven, Anna, and a cured Kim enter the diner from the beginning, and then Martin comes in. He goes and sits at the bar. They have their meal or whatever, then they get up to leave. They kind of lock eyes for a second. They go to walk out, and it looks like Kim turns back to give him a bit of a smile. And they walk out, and then we just hold on Martin's face as he just gazes at them. Then that's the end of the movie. And yeah, I'm sure there's a lot to look into it as far as themes, metaphors, stuff like that. But you know, I thought this was a very, very solid film. Even though it is based on a Greek tragedy, it did seem very original compared to just whatever else is going on, you know, in modern film. But definitely, this movie has the Kubrick-esque cinematography. It has a great, just layered, wallpapered score that fits perfectly, helps with the tension and the atmosphere. You know, the satire is very dry, doesn't become overbearing. Wonderful performances by everybody, especially Kogan. I don't know why I keep forgetting his last name, but I do. Barry Kogan, I was right. Especially him, he's a scene stealer, especially with some of his monologues, like when he's eating spaghetti, and then the monologue with the bit when he's explaining, you know, the 4 stages to Colin Farrell, and then at the end when he bites his arm, talks about balance and justice, his example. He's excellent at playing this childish yet severely mentally disturbed teenager. And just everything about this movie worked for me. I guess I can see how or why people might find it kind of pretentious, but it didn't come off as pretentious as other films that, like Darren Aronofsky's Mother. That's a movie I can agree, or Midsummer. That's a movie I can agree, okay, yeah, that's pretty pretentious. This just seems like a very, very well-made, solid film. That every technical aspect about it is just great across the board. And would this be a contender for my top 10 favorite horror films between, you know, 2010 to present, or at least the 2010s up until 2019? Sure. I mean, yeah. If it's not in the top 10, it's definitely an honorable mention. I love horror movies like this. I love A24. Everything about this movie worked for me. I loved going into it totally blind. I love it when, you know, at the halfway point, more or less, it just totally becomes a different movie, or it goes in a direction you might not expect. It might be a little slow at points, kind of like how Parasite was, even though Parasite wasn't a horror film. But, you know, it pulls you in with just these odd characters, their odd way of communicating and sort of conversations, and just how well it's shot and the world it creates. Wonderful at building tension. I really loved this movie. I thought it was excellent. So that is 2017's The Killing of a Sacred Deer. Now, I do have a few movies that I watched sort of randomly that I want to get to. I am going to try to get to the Q&A as soon as possible. But, you know, bear with me. About the next month or so is going to be a little hectic. I got some stuff going on. But I'm in the process of a move, so bear with me on that. But, yeah, 2017, Killing of a Sacred Deer. I loved it. Thank you for watching.